So welcome everyone to Museum of Glass, and welcome to the panel discussion for A Two-Way Mirror, Double Consciousness in Contemporary Glass by Black artists. We are so happy to have everyone here, and hope everyone in this auditorium has gotten a chance to see the exhibition now, as we're going to talk about a few things in the exhibition. So we have today three of the artists from the exhibition. To my right, we have Cheryl Derricotte. To her right, we have Barbara Earl Thomas. And then flanking the other end, we have Christopher Day. So much of the exhibition is about identity. And I definitely just wanted to start off by having each artist introduce themselves and their personal background, and then kind of go from there. And maybe say what your piece is in the exhibition as well. And we'll start off with Chris, since he's holding the mic, and he can just pass it down.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Chris Day, and my work's called Transition of Age.
Can you hold the mic a little closer?
Is that better? Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm Chris Day, and the work's called Transition of Age. I only started 6 years ago, so this is all very strange to me, to be honest. And if you'd have asked me 6 years ago that I'd be in Tacoma Museum of Glass, I wouldn't have even known where Tacoma was. Never mind that there was a Museum of Glass there. So my journey's been really, I'm just like on a rocket ship at the moment. And I'm a plumbing and heating engineer. So when I fly back on Wednesday, on Thursday, I'll be fitting boilers and bathrooms still. So that's what I am. I'm a plumbing and heating engineer that tells the story of racism, the civil rights, and slavery, and an identity. And over the last 6 years, it's been a very emotional journey. But not just for me. Like Jabari was saying the other night, our ancestors. And this is our time to celebrate what they went through and tell their stories.
My name is Barbara Earl Thomas, and I'm actually from Seattle. Someone asked me last night, like, where are you from? Because they thought everybody was here. I said, I'm from here, just from here. And I actually call myself, I'm an artist, but I'm not a glass artist. I use glass as one of my mediums because it transmits light. And I did one of my first workshop here, right here in Tacoma, in this space right here. So I have a lot of history and a lot of gratitude for all of the people in the space that work with artists who are not glass artists, because you got a lot to learn in a very short period. And I'm just happy to be here, and I thank Jabari and my co-artists.
Hello, I am Cheryl Derricotte. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I have been in the Bay Area of California for the last little over 12 years now. And so I live and work in San Francisco. I have actually been involved with glass for a little over 20 years now. When I fell in love with the medium, like a number of glass artists, I had been fooling around with ceramics, and then when I had the opportunity to learn glass, I don't think I touched a piece of clay for probably, until I got ready to cast some glass. I just let clay go. So I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time showing at the Museum of Glass, so I thank Jabari and his team for making this possible. And I have two pieces in the show called Glass Boys, All Black 1 and 2, and they're glass portraits of boys that used to work in the glass factories at the turn of the last century in America.
All right. You actually brought me to my next question for the whole panel is what brought each of you to this wondrous material? I know, Ms. Thomas, you were saying that you don't only work in glass, but and that is the case with several artists in the exhibition as well. But what made you want to use glass, and how did you feel it could better explore your ideas than another medium for the particular works that you make out of glass?
Well, my basic training was actually as a painter. You know, I came to this as a painter, and in my work, I'm really interested in how light transmits and creates form. So, you know, like many painters, you're using light and dark to create form, to create the illusion of space, to create the illusion that there is a light source somewhere in your work. And I have had the good fortune to know a number of glass artists, whether it's Cappy Thompson or many of the people. And Cappy looked at my work one day, she says, "Oh, you really need to work in glass." I said, "Would you stop tormenting me with that?" And so I did my first work actually painting on glass with Cappy in her studio, and that was amazing. And then we did actually a fellowship at Pilchuck together, where I was able to work with her, Joe Fedderson, Jeff Zimmer, and some other really fabulous glass artists. And you know, the thing about it, I think the thing about glass is it's very seductive. And it's beautiful. And the thing I say about glass, and I'll tell anybody, glass does not need you. It's so beautiful. You just see a lump of it somewhere and you just walk toward it and it's like that right there. It doesn't have to be anything. People just love it. So you really have to like take your personality in hand and go like, you know, I have to dominate because the glass doesn't need me. So I have to really impress myself so that I can leave a mark, because otherwise it'll just do its thing without me. And so working in painting, then actually the way I came to glass was through paper cutting. I made some small lanterns out of paper, and I thought, God, that would be really interesting if it wasn't glass. And so then I went to glass, and there's something about the glass community, because it's so collaborative, you have to work with other people. And you have to depend on other people for so many things. And for me, I feel like the glass community is kind of a metaphor for where we might go just as a culture, because you know what? You can't do glass by yourself, no matter how good you are. So anyway, that's my sort of history in coming to it. And my most recent glass project was at Yale University, where I replaced some windows at Yale in the Hopper College. I replaced Calhoun College. It was the Calhoun College, and I replaced those windows because they renamed the building Grace Hopper. And so I again got to use glass to tell a historical story about why we're changing the name from John Calhoun, who was a slaveholder and a proponent of slavery, to where we are today. And glass illuminated that, gave me the opportunity to illuminate that story. So that's how I come and stayed. So when if you
Want me?
Kristen. Oh, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So I came into glass late in life. I started university when I was 48, and I didn't want to go. My wife says you've got to go to university, and at the time I didn't realize I was dyslexic, but I'd always struggled reading and writing. And so when she says you're going to go to university, I thought, well, I'll go. I'd never done any art since I left school at 16. So I thought, I'll go. I've got no portfolio of work. I'll do what I need to do, the motions, and then I'll say bye-bye. But they didn't. They welcomed me with open arms. I'd never seen glass. I'd never seen ceramics. I can throw clay on a wheel. And that was it for my first year when I was at university, is that I thought, how can I do this once I leave university? So I decided to just concentrate on clay. But through the course, I had to do a foundation into this glass. And the thing for me was when I first gathered, it landed on the floor. And it was that motion of it landing on the floor where I wasn't in control. And for all of my life, I've either had society try to control me, my own mental being trying to control me, and I wasn't in control. And I think it was the first time I felt a bit free. And it's hard. It's hard when you've had to do and try to be identified and try to fit in. But being at university, it was a safe place, and I could find myself. And like you were saying about the community, I've only got here because of the support mechanism that's helped me. My work's okay, but it's everybody else that gives you the confidence and builds you up. You know, and the failures, you fail in glass, you know, you can look at it and it'll just crack.
That just happened to me.
Yeah, but it's, I think for me, it was the failures that I loved. I loved it dropping onto the floor. And for me as a heating engineer, is that I went to university and I took elements. That's why I used the copper, is that I took the copper because it was my comfort blanket. I had a material around me that I thought, I'm on my own here, but at least I've got my copper still and I know how to manipulate that. But I started off, I wanted to tell the story of me as a heating engineer using copper and show the beauty of the copper. But as soon as I started to blow into these cages, and straight away, as soon as you say cage, you've already got this feeling, this blank canvas, cage, incarceration, trying to break free. The glass is fragile. The glass supported me. I didn't hardly have to do anything. I just blew into these cages and it gave me all the words that I needed to tell the tutors. So that's how I found glass. And I don't know, I owe it so much.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Thank you. So I actually came to glass from arrogance. Like I said, I was in DC and I had been taking classes after work at the Corcoran College of Art and Design, and I did a certificate in ceramics and sculpture because I always knew I was an artist, and in my first life I was a performing artist, but I had a wonderful single mother who said, oh no, you need a job, you know. And mind you, she was a musician, my father was a musician, but nobody knew how they produced the artist. That could not have happened. And so I was taking these classes and I loved it so much, and at the end of my certificate, a place called the Washington Glass School opened, and I was like, well, if I can make a clay bowl, I can make a glass bowl, no problem. Everybody in that first workshop had done 2 or 3 bowls. I had not finished my first bowl, and I was like, I'm in love. And so the second class was a sculptural class, and unbeknownst to us, there was a Washington Post reporter embedded in the class. So when I said I wanted to make a sculpture about world poverty, she started following me and one of the co-directors around and sort of saying, that's interesting. And then, because nobody was showing glass in DC, we hung our own show. The Washington Post art critic came, and I was one of the 2 pieces he wrote up. And at that point, one of the other co-directors said, I think you got a future. Have you thought about your future in glass? I was like, absolutely not. And he said, I learned how to blow at a place called the Penland School of Crafts. I think you should go. There's a guy teaching named Thurman Statham, who's the most famous black glass artist on the planet, and you need to see somebody that looks like you right away. So that co-director, Tim Tate, served on the board of Penland for many years, and I learned how to blow with Thurman, and then went back and studied for 2 months with Claire Kelly in Venetian-style glass blowing because I just really wanted to be rooted in my craft. So even though I personally learned, I should not try to own all this equipment myself, and I settled down into warm glass. I've always appreciated glass blowing and having the ability to partner with people in the hot shop because I had that foundation.
And as you all see, everybody has a different story, a different narrative on how this material came to them. And each of these artists up here has different working methodologies, but each of them is telling stories with glass. And that is why I picked the pieces from them that I did, because each of those pieces tells a story. And I just wanted to ask each of you about the role that storytelling plays in your work. And it doesn't only have to be about the work that's in the gallery, but just in the larger life and body of your work. Storytelling often has the power to create change or make people look at things differently. So I'm just interested in your journeys in storytelling through glass.
So like I say, I went to university, and my education in England, we didn't get taught anything about Black history. We didn't have Black History Month, Black History Week. We didn't even have a Black History Hour. So for me going to university, it was my chance to actually find the education that I'd been denied. And so when I started to learn about these aspects that I'd been denied, is that I wanted to tell that story. You know, my tutors were saying that slavery was 400 years ago, just bury it, do something else, celebrate being black. But for me, this was all new. And I wanted to get it out of my system because I was already emotionally charged by the images that I was seeing. Like I say, being dyslexic is that I wasn't reading books, I was just looking at images. And when you've spent 2 to 3 hours looking at these images of, say, Emmett Till or lynching, is that how can you not be emotionally charged? How can you tell the story, and especially in glass, about something that's really brutal? But like Barbara was saying, glass has got like this magpie effect. As soon as you've got something glass, people are already magnetized to it. And I was finding that. So I thought I can start to produce work that won't scare people away, that will engage with a conversation and try and break down the barriers so people feel safe and they can start to talk about these aspects. I think the most upsetting, one of the most I can't even get it out. But the story of Emmett Till, that's what turned me from somebody who was crying in front of their tutors after looking at these images after a weekend, to somebody who became strong enough to tell his story, and the stories of George Stinney, and the stories of lynching, and the slave trade. And glass made me able to do that, and the people around me made me do that as well. They gave me that support to be able to tell these stories. But it wasn't just my story. It was nothing to do with me. It was stories that were out there. People call me a political artist, but all I'm doing is telling stories that are already in history but hidden. And that was the problem. It was hidden from me during my education, and even at university, they still didn't want me to say what I was saying. They didn't want me to discuss things and bring up the past. One of the biggest things I owe to being here is George Floyd. He's changed the whole structure of museums, establishments, the education system. People are now telling them stories, having conversations. So I owe a lot to my wife and to George.
Well, I always say that I came to storytelling naturally. My parents came to the Northwest. Well, I would say my dad came to the Northwest because he was in during World War II, and then the Korean conflict, when certain young men were based at Fort Lewis. So once my dad got based at Fort Lewis, then of course his mom came, and then all of the people came, and I guess I used to tell people, if you want a father, you just go to Fort Lewis, because that's where we keep them, at Fort Lewis. And but they were storytellers. You know, the way they taught us, the way we were raised, it wasn't like, don't do this. There was always a story to go with it, you know. You don't want to get up and go to school, you know. I had to go, everyone here has this story about I walked 20 miles in the snow. Well, my dad, because he was born in Florida, he was chased to school by a water moccasin every day. And so that's what he had to overcome. And I'd never seen a water moccasin. So in my mind, it was this S-shaped thing with a shoe. And, you know, so there were these things that I just came to naturally. I mean, I grew up during a time when actually narrative artwork was not really popular. You know, if you had a story to tell, I had a guy walk up to me once and he says, "You're emotional." I said, "Really?" And I think that what I wanted to do was just, you know, tell these little stories. And unlike you, I mean, I think that because I did grow up steeped in a lot of these stories, I'm not surprised. I'm not, you know, even very overwhelmed with it. But what I am wanting to do is say there's stories everywhere. I walk around my studio, just pick up little stories. And so when I look at my community or I look at all of you, I have a story. I can make up a story just looking at that flower in your hair. And so in my work, I'm telling stories, and what I want to do is like take the average and the normal and make it fantastic. You know, I want to tell the epic in the everyday. So my piece in the show is called The Fire Blower, Fire Breather. So I talk about the magic I see in every day because I grew up with a lot of magic. And a lot of, you know, my mother would say things like, you know, my mother coming from Louisiana, we could not, if my dad was changing like out the light sockets or the plugs, she would put us all in another room because she thought the electricity was coming out of the wall. And if it was lightning and thundering outside, we'd all have to get in the bed and be quiet because God was talking. And when you grow up like that, you know, you see magic everywhere. So it's a story you want to tell. And I think that there's stories that everyone can sort of relate to, but the origins are in my, you know, just the place where I am. So I still haven't run out of stories. And I tell stories in the work, but I also tell stories in words. I tell stories in the paintings. And there was a writer who said, there's some people who write because they know the story and they have the story to tell. And there are other people who write because in the writing or in the making is where you find the story. And I'm the latter. I make work because I want to know what the story is. And in the making of the work, I find the story. And if I'm fortunate enough, the story is clear enough so that others can also follow it as well.
I think for me, the storytelling came from the type of work that I'm attracted to when I look at other artists' work and then the teachers I had. So in terms of like work that I enjoy or made an impact for me, you know, when I was doing the certificate at the Corcoran, I remember they had exhibited a piece by Carrie Mae Weems, who I think she's talking to me even though I don't know her because she does so much with text and image. But they were showing her piece, Mirror, Mirror. And for those of you that don't know the piece, a black woman is staring in a mirror and an image is looking back at her and she says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And the mirror says back to her, "Snow White, not you, black bitch." And it was the first time, you know, that I felt really seen in a piece of artwork, understood the power of text and image together, and, you know, thought I wanted to put that together in my own art somehow. And so my first teachers at Washington Glass School were very interested in telling stories either through the materials like Irwin Timmers with recycled glass or through the narrative about LGBTQ history and Tim Tate's work, or Michael Janis's beautiful portraits. So they were all encouraging, it's okay if you want to tell stories. And then in going to Penland, my teachers there were people who also told stories. I mean, all of Thurman's immersive installations are like meditations on his family history through the South, and responsive to places where he makes those installations. Susan Taylor Glasgow, also somebody I studied with at Penland, and what she does from a feminist narrative. And then Lisa Beth Robinson and Kristen Thiel King, who do a lot of mix and printmaking and glass techniques. So I was just constantly, fortunate enough to study with people who valued storytelling. And I think, the work you're seeing in this show is the way that my own voice sort of grew up over the last 10 years, in that I like to put historical imagery into our contemporary dialogues. And so there was a point in 2020 when everybody was saying, well, where are the Black glass artists? And I said, here they are hiding in plain sight from 100 years ago in the factories. We have always been here.
I think that last point was a very salient one. And I think that was part of my intention for curating this show, was to give visibility to the fact that there are Black people working in glass. I studied sculpture in school and didn't know anything about glass until I came to work here. And so it was like receiving an additional piece of education on a daily basis. And so I started to look around, and I wanted to be able to see others like me who were telling this story. My question to you all is, how does it feel to be contextualized by a curator into a show about glass art, based on the fact that you are Black glass artists that deal with storytelling, talking about your own identities, whether that be whimsical, whether that be serious, whether that be historical. How does it feel to be in that context?
No, go for it. You got the baton.
Well, let me just start by saying, it feels great. I don't know if y'all have walked around that show. Oh my gosh. No, I mean, I just can't say thank you enough to Jabari and everybody at the museum. I remember early in my career, there was a show at the Pittsburgh Center for Contemporary Craft, and I didn't see the show, but I was looking for people who looked like us, and it was actually a show that was curated by the great Joyce Scott, called Stop Asking We Exist, 25 African American Craft Artists. And I was able to get that catalog, and I have clutched that catalog through my whole career. And to think, that it took this long to go a step further and have this show of Black glass artists is just amazing. So, I'm really grateful that I was here, and able to be part of it. And it's just a wonderful show to not only continue that legacy, but expound upon it and really root it in a medium that we all love, the material of glass. And, I know some artists are like, oh, I don't want to be just like a Black artist or just a this. I'm always going to be a Black female. I'm not separating that from being an artist. So I think the fact that there are mainstream institutional spaces like a Museum of Glass that can also recognize the importance of diversity and uplifting voices of color, like this show, and indigenous work in the Pacific Northwest, is a wonderful thing.
So just imagine Strange Fruit, Billie Holiday. She was imprisoned, sanctioned, couldn't even sing the song. And here we are, Strange Fruit. on display for everybody to see. Hopefully you won't get arrested. And like I say, we've come a long way. We've come a huge long way. So when Jabari says that I was going to be in this show and he wanted Strange Fruit, I'm thinking, I wonder how. I've had it displayed in England where people perhaps don't even know the song Strange Fruit, don't know the history behind it. So I felt extremely safe. But bringing it to America, it still feels extremely unsafe for me. And I dare say there'll be a lot of people out there that will view it and still feel that it shouldn't be on display. But Jabari's been brave enough to put it on display, as well as other artists. And I'll be truly grateful for that. And I'm sure Billie Holiday would be. You know, what she was trying to do to change, I think that's what this exhibition's going to do. It's going to create a huge change and talking point, but a safe talking point. None of us are going to get arrested, hopefully. So, you know, it's time for this conversation to be had. It's time for us to create a different world, and that's what glass can do. That's what I've found glass can do. I was having a conversation with Sue in the shop, and the conversation we was having was about the work. It was about the ideas and how she's going to change. And this is the greatest thing about when we start talking, is that people will feel brave enough, and they can feel brave enough to tell their story through their work. And that's what I try and do. I'm telling my story, putting my heart on my hand, hoping that other people will become brave enough. And I think if there's enough of us, we will make that change eventually.
I always grapple with that question. And I grapple really hard, even as I appreciate and hear what you have said and appreciate and hear what you have said. I guess maybe because of, you know, the origins of where I came from, but I actually think that America is a subset of me. I do not think I am a subset of America. And you become a subset, you know, a set is, you know, in algebra and math, is inside of that, the bracket. The bracket is the main thing, and then the things that are inside of the subset. And the subset, because I know everything about America, and they don't know everything about me. So I do not think of myself as being the diverse thing. I think of myself as being if you want to come to me, you want to ask me about white people, I can tell you. Want to ask me about, you know, my being from the Pacific Rim, I can tell you that, because I'm from the Pacific Rim. I can tell you about what it means when your parents go and they have their dances at the Swedish Hall and at the Polish Hall, because that's how I grew up. So I do get very passionate about the fact that, yes, I am diverse, and I don't mind. I am loving being in this show because I finally got to meet you. And I didn't know that I needed to meet you, and I did. But I get to see every one of your faces here too, and now you're part of my subset because you have chosen to come here. So I guess what I'm saying is I am holding space for when this conversation is not needed. I'm holding space so that when someone asked me, well, how does it feel to be a black woman artist? I said, how can I know how it feels to be anything else? I said, I'm not picking myself apart. And I said, as opposed to being a white woman artist, I actually don't know what you mean by that. But I think that obviously I have a little emotion around it. I never think I do until someone asks me. And so I am happy to be here because I get to be joined with a community that's working in all these places. But I also feel like I am also the subject of the sentence, the verb and the object. And I do not have to be picked out, and it's not my job to tell everyone here all of my story, but to make it available and to show you how you're also included in that story. because I don't get to be this if you haven't been that. And that is what I'm doing when I'm thinking about the mythological basis of the derivation of our stories. I mean, I feel like there's like 7 stories in the world, and we just keep living them. You know, there's Prometheus and the fire. That's kind of what I think about in my work. I'm telling that story through, you know, sort of a figure that comes through and does all that. You know, I know those stories, and I know what it means to my community. You know, my parents, I tell this story in my work about, you'll see in my work there's a lot about fishing. I always wanted to go to Disneyland, and all my dad wanted to do was go fishing. So I don't think there's much of a lake in any of Washington that I haven't been to. So there are these myths that, you know, I tell about how you do something that's a ritual, but it's also about sustenance and feeding your family. It's about feeding the whole neighborhood. And if my dad liked you, I could always tell if he liked you, because if he'd come in, he'd look at you for a while and he'd say, "You want a package of fish?" And then you could get perch, crappie, catfish, or, you know, sole if he had gone to the sound. And you kind of base who he liked better by the kind of fish he gave you. So I guess I'm just saying that I'm holding space so that maybe your great-great-grandkids have a different conversation. It won't be this one. That's it.
I think each of you made important points. And as you can see, there's 4 different people up here. And we are all in an exhibition about black glassblowers, and we probably all see blackness very differently. It's not a monolithic thing. And I think that's part of what this exhibition is about. It's about how you see yourself, but also double consciousness is seeing yourself and relating that to how the world sees you. And so I think that is one of the reasons why I wanted to frame the exhibition that way. I definitely think that historically, there probably were, as Cheryl has put in her work, black glass artisans. But there's so much erasure in history of presence of black people in different spaces. So I want 20 years from now there to be a record of this, a record of the black people who are making glass work right now. And I think that that's very important. And I just want to talk to you all and to see what you think about the responsibility of institutions and such as museums and publishers and people who are kind of creating these narratives about how the world is perceived to do it in a more plural way. And so that is one thing that I hope to bring to this institution with this exhibition. I think many times museums as well as publishing companies have been complicit with erasure. And I think that to have a museum willing to take on the idea of, all right, this group of people is present, I think is important. So do you all view museums as having responsibilities like that?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, when you started, everybody, call your foundation friends. We need a catalog, because, you know, you heard me talk about how important it was to have the catalog of Stop Asking We Exist, to be able to find that as a next generation artist. So I want the next generation of artists to find the catalog of this show. And
anybody would like to donate to that, feel free.
Yeah, call your foundation friends.
I'm ready to write it, if anybody wants to donate.
But I also, you know, I think it gets back to your question about storytelling, in that I have always felt like the museum and the gallery are the places to host brave dialogues if they choose to, because so much of our society doesn't want to have the conversation, whether it's in the US or the UK or any place else. And so what better vehicle than art to open up a dialogue and have a safe space for enhanced learning. So yeah, I hope that a lot of people get to see this show while it's up. I hope that at some point the show actually will travel, maybe even to the East Coast, who knows?
Maybe even to the UK.
Maybe even to the UK, because we would love to go to the UK.
Yes, we would.
So that would be awesome too. And I think that, I was thinking, Barbara, we could have a whole nother panel on that, because, growing up in DC, I believed I was a majority person. I grew up in Chocolate City, 95% black, make my funk a P-Funk. So it was very interesting to relocate to the West Coast and realize that people thought I was a minority. I was like, really? So I think that continuing to look in this lens, the two-way mirror, I think is a valuable lens to continue to have these conversations.
Well, I don't know who said it, but I know someone did. If they don't write about it, it's almost like it never happened. So I think that is again, what is history? It's about the things people choose to remember. And what you choose to remember is what you end up getting in the 5th grade and the 6th grade and it's what someone somewhere has chosen to remember. And I think that, I have worked on both sides of the number line. I've worked at the arts commissions, I've worked in public art, I've worked in museums. And I feel like one of the things that we, in terms of memory and how we gather facts together, again, we have to be doing some of the writing and others have to be doing the writing. I said, but what I want to go toward is when it's not just your responsibility, and it's not just seasonal, and it's not just monthly, because I still think that, we're kind of like the ornament. And artists have had that experience. You're like, here, come to the show, come to the party. We need an artist, because you guys are different. Well, just imagine you go down the subset, come, we need like a black woman artist. You're really special. We need someone from the UK. You're really special. And I feel like I don't want to take our specialness away, but I also want there to be a way that it's not because George Floyd died that now we got to, virtue signal. I just had a show that opened in Wichita. Wichita, my God, who goes to Wichita? I did. And I told someone, they said, where are you going to do that? I said, as soon as I get off the plane, I'm going to go out into the field and I'm going to sing Wichita Lineman. Then I'm going to come back and go to the opening. And, but I ended up, working with kids and doing this sort of thing with kids they kind of completed my installation. And I gave them an assignment. I gave Wichita an assignment. I said, I want 6 to 8 kids. I want them to be everything. Black, white, Spanish speaking, whatever you got, bring it here. And then I want you to have this gathering, and I don't want you to use the word diversity, minority, or anything. Can you do that? Can you have me in this room with these kids and not do that and not feel like you don't get the full value of my being here by not being able to say it? You can take pictures. So I allowed them to take pictures, and we all went together and we did that, and all the kids were there, and we finished the piece. And it was also, I don't know if when you write, I always feel that the best part of the writing or the best part of getting my work done is in the editing, where you're pulling out all of the embellishments, all of the extra stuff, and then you're left with the essence. And I feel like that is what, when you're dealing with museums and you're dealing with how you want things to be, I want to be normalized. Just fucking mainstream me. I'm okay. I can be here, and you all could do that by not making it just Jabari's job. Because I think what's happened is that when you get people and they come in and you go like, oh, well, we have somebody for that. So the rest of the institution does not have to think. The rest of the institution does not have to do anything because we have the fix is in. And he is perfect and has all kinds of knowledge, but also could lend all sorts of knowledge to other things. So to the other part, I mean, you know, I say I live in the world, I'm concerned about climate change, I'm concerned about all kinds of things. I mean, I happen to know that the air I breathe, that there is some not some part over here for black people and some part over here for the rest of the world. So I'm trying to make sure it's cleaned up for everybody. So I think it is for the institution, for the agency, to how do we, when we get comfortable, take away that comfort so that we can make these things normal, you know, in the institution, so that whether you're here or not, the story's going to happen. And that doesn't mean you don't have a job. It just means it's not all on your shoulders. And so that's, and then same for the publishing. And I know I've been in books. I'm a book person. So in the books, you know, like what's selling? What's hot? You know, how do you, oh, we can't have a book about that because we already had that story. So you got to write about something else. And you got to do whatever it is you got to do because it's the subject that's been assigned to you. I just hope that if you ever just want to do something about, I don't know, just a still life, that it's okay for you to do that because that's your story too. So anyway, I think that's what I want from my institution. I want you to be brave. I want you to be willing to make a mistake, because you will make a mistake. That's what the first thing the kids asked me when they came in and I gave them a knife and they start cutting. What happens if we make a mistake? I said, it's not if, it's when. And we're all gonna be in on the fix, you know, because I'm going to assume you are not meaning to make a mistake. You just make a mistake. So, and unless you get to that edge, and I think that's what happens when you work and when I work, I like to work right on that edge where and the edge is like failure, okay, success. And it's terrifying. And so I want us all to be just a little terrified, not horribly terrified, but just a little bit. And that's where you find truth. And that's what I want for my institution.
Wow, these ladies have got so much experience. I've only been doing it 6 years. And I've only been really recognized for 3 of them. And in them 3 years, I'm in 8 museums. Talking about Emmett Till's, talking about the slave trade, talking about identity. The institutes are definitely changing. And for me, yeah, I'd love to do glass unicorns. But for me, the history of Britain and its involvement with the slave trade has been hidden. It's been hidden in all the institutes. I went down to the British Museum when I was doing my research, and I wanted to see if there was any items there that was associated to the transatlantic slave trade. And I was looking around and I was looking around and I couldn't see a single item. So I went to one of the curators and I says, have you got anything about the transatlantic slave trade? And she just looked at me weirdly and says, we've got some artifacts of Roman slaves and Egyptian slaves. But for me, it was as if they'd hidden the transatlantic slave trade. So for me, it's important to celebrate, but at the moment, the institutes in England are changing. They are changing because of George Floyd, but we've got to start at some level. So if they can expose what's happened in the history, then perhaps we can move on. And that's what I'm finding. I've just won a commission for Liverpool Museum. Liverpool was one of the big trading points for the slave trade, but they're already recognizing their involvement, and they want to show. That's what I've got to produce. I've got to produce a piece of work that shows their involvement in the slave trade. Not about me doing unicorns. They don't want that yet. And I think for other people, they've got to see. I went to the museum, and they got me there to get some sort of inspiration so I can produce this piece of work. And as I'm looking around, they're showing me pictures, Rembrandts, Lowry's, all these academics. I can't see a single black face. Perhaps one, a little one here and a little one there. No artifacts. There were some shackles, and that was it, and some sugar tongs. And I've got to try and get some sort of inspiration to create a piece of work to put there to tell that story. I've already got a title. It's going to be called Sugar Coated, because that's what history has done. It's sugar coated and it's hidden it a lot. And so for me, I'm still finding myself. I'm still trying to find my history. I'm trying to reveal the history, and not to people like me. It's for the kids to see, because it's been hidden from them. It's for the people that go to the football clubs, normal people. I'm not highly educated. I come from, you call it the projects, I call it a council estate. I'm not well educated, but I'm educated enough to want to educate people in things that are missing.
All right. So before we close out, I want to just get a little more specific and just have each of you talk a little bit about your piece that's in the exhibition and your process for making it and your ideas around it. Ms. Thomas, when you were talking about editing, I'm usually adding in more flourish. So I'm on the whole opposite end of that. I was thinking that as you were talking. But yes, I just wanted to kind of talk about the pieces because I think each of them is really interesting and different approaches to art making, as different as the personalities and as different as the backgrounds and as different as who each of you all are as a human being. And so I just wanted to get into that.
Well, I said the piece that I have here, it's called Fire Blower. There are lots of figures with fire coming from their bodies and into the world. And then the whole idea, actually those were some of my first, that was in the group, in the body of the first vessels, story vessels. I call them story vessels, where I put the story around and I use the vessel as actually my surface for telling the story, and that you could walk around and the light is coming through the figures, and the whole idea that, number one, it was about the fire, because that's where I was here making the vessel, and then also the idea of what you're doing in the world. You know, how you take magic, the magic of the everyday, and make something out of it, and how that illuminates. It's kind of like visual illumination. So it's just a small story, and and I usually have chickens and cows and stuff floating through, because I feel like part of what I do, part of what I think art is, it's taking things that aren't normally together and making them make sense visually together, and all of a sudden the thing that seemed like it was impossible becomes possible. And it's a certain amount of the danger. I think that life is really, this whole thing that we've got here, this big dome in our houses, you just let it sit here and don't do anything for like 6 months. Trees will start growing up, grass will overtake it. I mean, I think about when we had COVID. On my block, we were, in the lockdown. I looked out the street and there was a mallard walking down the street. And I said, they're taking over now. We haven't come outside. We're not using the street. We got the coyotes. We got the mallards. Now we're overrun by rabbits. I don't know where the coyotes are. We got rabbits everywhere. And they're not the Easter Bunny. And so I feel like I always want to be aware that the world is fascinating, but it's also a very dangerous place. It's very dangerous. So I get amused when people say, like, I need to go and I have to get a safe space. I said, is it on this planet? I mean, is it on this planet? Because this planet is, if left to your own device, this is dangerous. And of course, we come in as humans and we make it even more dangerous. And so I just want to talk about how we situate that all together and how we make it through a day, not being killed, don't go to the mall, how we make it through a day's work when you have to, there's so much you have to do in order to survive. And just, I guess, be witness to that small triumph. Because every day you get up and you get your kids off to school, that is a triumph. And it doesn't have to be that way. And then how do you give thanks for that? Go on and do it again and again and again. And it's that doing it over again and again is where I feel like my story gets rooted.
So this exhibition for me is like, I feel like Cinderella. But the reason I feel like that is that there's two artists in here that I studied while I was at university, and I had to find them myself. First one's Fred Wilson, and the second one's Cara Walker. And when I started wanting to produce work, I wanted to be a Cara Walker, but I knew her explicit illustrations would just scare people away. And then I came across Fred Wilson, which hides the story, but still wants to engage. So I thought, and especially me being mixed race, I thought I can be a bit of both. So that's where Strange Fruit came in. I wanted to tell the brutal story of lynching, but how can I do that? I can't have black bodies hanging there like Cara Walker perhaps would. And I didn't want to be gentle like Fred Wilson. So I combined the both, how they told their stories, and they influenced me how I was going to do Strange Fruit. But I tried to hide things. I wanted it to look like a butcher's shop window. When I was growing up, you'd go down the high street and you'd go into the butcher's shop, or you'd go past it and you'd see all these pieces of meat hanging off hooks. And that was my inspiration. But unfortunately, the meat that was hanging wasn't the one that we was going to eat. It was the flesh of humans, and just because of the color of the skin, somebody decided that they weren't worthy to be on this world. So I told the story of lynching through a butcher's shop window. But it was the shininess of the glass that engaged people. That was the thing that brought people close to it. But unfortunately, as soon as they read the statement, they backed away. It's a shame. In England, they didn't want to have the conversation. And again, until George Floyd. That piece of work was produced in 2019, way before George Floyd. But there'd always been a lynching before George, before Emmett Till. There's been thousands of lynchings, and they're still being lynched today. And not just people of color, what we see in Palestine. So that was Strange Fruit. And then I came here because of Jabari. The way I was growing up and the way I grew up being mixed race was I didn't fit in. I didn't fit into white society. I didn't fit into black society. The stigma and the trauma that I went through growing up, I hid. And it was only through art and the support of others that I grew confident enough to perhaps one day tell my story. And then I got asked to come to Tacoma, and I thought this might be my last chance to say and go through and tell people what I've been through. So that's where Transition of Age come from, because it was my time to transition and be proud of who I am for once. I'm 55 now, and I think this year is the first time I've actually been proud of who I am as a person. And Transition of Age is my own therapy of being able to face that, face my own demons, tell the story of not having a father figure, tell the story of the racism that I went through, and not just through people, my own family, to hopefully encourage somebody else to be brave enough to tell their story, which it has. I've had so many conversations with other people from mixed heritage that have said, wow, that's exactly how my husband felt, or that's how I feel. I had an exhibition in London when I came back from this, and the amount of emails and people telling me their stories, it made me feel like I actually belonged for the first time. So that's where Transition of Age has come from. And I'm so grateful to Jabari and to Mog for doing that for me, because without that, I'd have perhaps hidden that story for a lot longer as well. So thank you, Jabari.
Also, thank you to our hot shop, because they helped to produce those pieces during your residency here, which was amazing, which brought so many different new ideas here, which were awesome, Chris. So thank you for making that here. And not last but not least, Cheryl.
You know, I was always interested in history. I mean, the original educational stuff I did, I was a minor in history, you know, when it was like get a day job from the mother. And the work in this show, you know, did come out of people sort of saying, well, where are the black glass artists? And I had seen one of those two images on a historical craft website and thought, oh, that's interesting. So when the time was right a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to do the research and was just stunned to find out that, you know, back in the 19-teens and the 1920s, while America was incredibly segregated, clearly capitalism was not, because, you know, you saw all these boys of all races working on the factory floor together, and, you know, quiet as it's kept, yeah, technically they were white, but they weren't really white. They were Italian American, they were Irish American, they were Jewish American, with the black children working in those factories. So it really was a conversation not only about our history as glass artists, but just, you know, our history of capitalism in the US. So you know, that was enough to get me hooked. And I made 5 pieces in that series. And in all 5 of those images, you either see, like the work in this show, exclusively portraits of black boys who were on the factory floors, or mixed race groups of boys, and nobody looks like they're over 18, and many of them are like 9 or 10. And I think I just had an affection for the boys too, because even though they're tiny, when you look at their positions, they're all like, and hat to the side, because they are glass blowers, you know, so they are just like pint-sized attitude all the way. So I adored them. And I just think glass as a medium has such a rich history when it comes to the portrait. So I'm just happy that my work can be a part of that, whether it was from, you know, glass work in photography around the daguerreotype all the way through cameo work. I just feel like glass has always been in conversation with the portrait.
All right, those are all the questions I have. I think that we can open it up to maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience for these amazing artists. And you can ask all of them, or maybe just one of them, a specific question if you have it. So, anybody have any questions?
told you everything, my God.
I know we've discussed a lot. So, questions going once.
Going right? Oh.
One of the messages of this exhibit going into it is how glass has become more accessible. Can you talk about that and how it's become a space where more Black artists are present or people of different income levels?
Well, from my personal relationship to glass, I would say it was more accessible over the years because we have more and more either community-based studios that are nonprofits over the years, residencies like the ones at the Museum of Glass, or individual artist studios where people make teaching a part of the income profile of their studio. So I think those are the ways that it has become more accessible. Certainly places like Hilltop here in Tacoma, which are focused around making sure youth have access. And I think, I feel like this is like insider baseball probably with this crowd, but for, maybe the 3 people in here that don't know, Studio Glass is new. It's only been the last 60 years that the furnace has been in a small scale environment, from what Harvey Littleton and Dominic Labino did in the early days, in Ohio. So even just getting glass into the educational structures through the creation of small furnaces in the last 60 years opened it up to a lot of people that it otherwise would not have been open to.
So the question again, it was like, what has opened up glass? That's really interesting to me because I think that, again, glass has been in this milieu, like with whether it's ceramics or other things that are made by hand. And because things get made by hand in a certain kind of way, they have not necessarily always fallen into fine arts. And that conversation, is this a fine art or is this a craft? And that conversation is still going on. And so if you go to a school or you go someplace and people say you're gonna major in art or you're gonna be an artist, I think there's still sort of this maybe sometimes unspoken sense that things that are made that people can actually use in their houses, like bowls and cups and glasses, kind of lower it in the esteem of what is the fine art. So there's that. So that means that it's not necessarily visible to people who are looking to find outlets for their work. And I know that the way I came into glass was because of meeting other people who were working in glass. And it wasn't because I went to university and someone said, have you considered glass? Or have you looked at, the historic glass? That was never a conversation, and I was a minor in art history, so I never saw that. So I feel like it's like everything else. It's kind of become visible over time, and then we say the name that's hanging in our, Jahuli came and he made the Northwest, along with many other people, this place where it was part of our landscape. And so that's been the last 50 years. And so seeing that and people seeing that and seeing that it could live someplace where in sort of the magnificent places and then going over and doing the Venetian glass and coming back and forth. And then all of a sudden I end up at Pilchuck. And then also the thing I think that helped me was that when there was a program here at the museum for non-glass artists, because you had to you go to a place and go like, I wasn't like you, I didn't go and learn how to blow glass, I didn't learn how to, do all the hand building and all that kind of thing. Yeah, that's why I like glass people, because they like, the church, they just forgive me, because I don't know how to do any of this. I know how to do more of it now, but, again, it was a group activity. And so you go in, and people were very generous, very generous. It's not to say, I mean, I have to say, glass artists are way more generous than painters. You know, you could be standing there asking them about something, and they wouldn't tell you if your life depended on it, because it might be something they might miss if they tell you. But that's not how glass artists are. I mean, there's a real generosity there, and there's a real theater. And you know, and since I tend to be a little dramatic, I like being in the drama. My first activity here, when I came here and I was in here, and you know, they put it on the little ICU2 TV, I was standing over there in the corner. No, I walk in, and Ben says, I get here, and I have not been in a hot shop before, and this is how naive I was. I thought, oh, I was gonna go do glass in the day, and I was gonna go back and read all evening. When I got done, when those guys got done with me, when I went back, I fainted. In my room, I had worked that hard, and I walked in, and Ben looks at me, he goes like, so what do you wanna do? What do you wanna do? Shit, I gotta think, I gotta be really smart. And then they start drawing on the floor, and I started drawing on the floor. I said, that's what he's doing, that's what I'm gonna do. And so I drew a picture, and he said, oh, I think we could do that. I said, oh yeah, we could do that. And I feel like that hooked me. You know, it hooked me that there could be that kind of generosity, and it hooked me that I could fail right on camera. And I knew I was on camera because I stood over there, and I went to pull my phone out of my pocket, and someone texted me and said, I saw you do that. So I made sure I did not scratch or touch myself in public, because I didn't want relatives to be embarrassed. So I think that kind of situation, having a situation where you can have some place where someone says in a sentence, this is a project for people who are not necessarily glass artists, allows you the entry, so that you don't have to feel like, oh my God, I know not enough to be there. So now since I've done it, so I find my friends and I say, you need to go over there because I think you'd really enjoy that. So, you know, I've had some friends who just came here and had one of the 3 or 4 day residencies, and it's like that. And when people see that you can do it, and they look at you and they've known you forever, then they feel like they could do it. And I think that's part of the, you know, the kinetic sharing and the zeitgeist that now is more visible everywhere.
Well done. So the question was about diversity.
The question was about access to
Access.
to making glass.
Access to glass. Okay, so I'm going to change it to diversity as well. You're so lucky over here. So let's get rid of the diversity bit. When I was in England, I was studying, I did an interview for the BBC, and this will answer your question. So the question I asked was, am I the only black glassblower? Because I couldn't see any. I wasn't being told of any by the tutors, other glassmakers, fellow students. So I went to the BBC and I asked that question, hoping that the interview would then, I'd have this influx of people of color that were doing glass. Nothing. So let's get rid of that bit now. The UK at the moment, we haven't got Hilltop, we haven't got this, we haven't got programs. They've not done anything to invest for the new blood to come through. It's been extremely elitist, and unfortunately I've got to say white elitist, because obviously, am I the only black glassblower? To a point, establishments that are doing programs are having to close down. We've just lost Northlands, which was perhaps the only program that could offer some sort of respite for the expense of what it is to do glass in the UK. So when I see the Hilltop artists and the veterans and all these other different programs that museums like this, Pilchuck, are running to engage with the community, it's like chitty chitty bang bang in England. We don't see it. We don't see kids. The average age of a glassblower is perhaps 50. We do Zoom meetings, average age 50. So inclusion, forget about diversity. We've got absolutely nothing running, and it's on its knees. So, unfortunately, I'm in museums, and the way it looks, I'm going to become a museum piece as well. I hope it'll change. And it is changing. You know, the ones that are surviving are trying their best and their utmost to keep this alive. The artists that are out there are banding together because we've got to, because if we don't start acknowledging that it is a collaboration, whereas in the past they've been quite self-centered and kept all the learning traits to themselves, is that they've got to start sharing. They've got to start diversifying how they're actually practicing now. And hopefully that will just keep it alive long enough. But yeah, it's on its knees.
All right. Oh, right here we have a hand. It looks like my older sister.
Chérie, à toi.
Well, thanks for that question. And I bet we're going to get different answers, which is awesome. For me personally, text, you know, a lot of times a phrase of text or an idea is stuck in my head long before I ever make a schematic drawing, much less cut a piece of glass, you know. I will say that, you know, once the sort of initial kernel of text is there, then the research comes into play. So, you know, I recently had the opportunity to make my first public artwork, and it took, yeah, it's awesome. I want to plug glass. So I made the first monument in the US to Harriet Tubman featuring glass as the primary material. So, you know, that was a piece where I certainly had an idea that I wanted it to be based on her house in Auburn, New York, because I wanted the story of Harriet Tubman as a property owner to be shared, because I don't think that a lot of times when people talk about Harriet Tubman, they think, oh, conductor, Underground Railroad, or you even read, she died poor. And I'm like, if you got 32 acres, 4 or 5 buildings, and you leave that to your local AME Zion church, you're not really poor. You might be cash poor, but you have assets. So, you know, for me, it's this constant dance between what is the story that I want to share, what's that fragment of text, and then how can that best be expressed through glass primarily.
Well, again, I am a storyteller, and so I have done a number of public art pieces, and I've had to translate things into steel, things into all sorts of metals, things that can live outside. Glass, of course, can live outside, but it has to have a certain amount of protection or it's not gonna make it. And I think that what I'm trying to do, I'm gonna not just talk about glass, but getting the idea, you know, is I'll have an assignment for myself, and I'll go like, well, what is the best form for this idea? Is it words? Is it steel? Is it paper? Is it glass? And I try to pick the one that, you know, if it's better told in words, I won't tell it in glass. I won't tell it in something else. And also, how can I like to say, I think of my working, I'm a maker. I think I'm an artist, but I make things. And I also think of making as thinking. When I'm making something, I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out what I'm thinking. And I like to say that if I've thought clearly enough and if I've honed my own mind, my own ideas clearly enough, then they will be apparent, those things will be apparent to the viewer. So in one of my shows I did with Derek Adams actually, I did a show, it's called Packaged Black, and it was about how the clothes we wear signal for the one who sees us a little bit about who we are before we ever speak. So I did a dress that was called Cinderella Redressed. And because I always thought that I wanted to tell my Cinderella story. So my Cinderella ended up being 9 feet tall with a steel armature and lit from inside, because I felt like in order to sometimes be seen, it's like being in the forest and you're being, approached by a predator. You gotta be bigger, you gotta be shinier, and you gotta be more imposing. And if you're that, then you get to live to go to the ball. And so I wanted to tell that idea, so I created a 9-foot dress that was all hand cut, that was lit from the inside, and had a 25-foot train. And Chick had a good time, and it was a good idea, and it was visually easily interpreted, and that was something I felt was successful.
So last night, listening to Jabari's speech, he says we are our ancestors' wildest dream. And that's where I think my visions come from. Because I don't know where some of these visions come from, but I wake up and I've got an idea. And I've always thought that my ancestors are in me through my DNA, and they've laid this to be told at a certain time, and this is the right time. So for me, I don't have visions, I don't do drawing. I sketch with my hands when I'm making these copper structures, but even then, I've got no idea what I'm gonna do. I just get a piece of copper and I bind it. But something's instructing me how to bind it. And all I can say is that it's coming from deep within and through a long journey. It might sound like I'm just making it up, but I really do not know where some of this comes from. Obviously, the images that I'm looking at, I start to create a library and a catalogue of things, but being dyslexic, perhaps I'm just looking at it totally different and putting it down how I can put it down. But to be honest, yeah, I just think it comes from deep within, from my ancestors.
All right. So everyone, that is going to conclude this panel discussion. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you to the artists for just coming here and sharing your stories, sharing your work, sharing your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.